Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Ortiz, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar Ortiz, and with me today I have someone that I met through the world of podcasting. So I'm really excited to talk to her about the world of work as well. And so listeners, I'd like to introduce you to Michelle Ong. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Pilar. Nice to speak to you again.
Yes, wonderful. So this time I'm speaking to you with a different kind of hat. As per your website, you describe yourself as a creator, technologist, developer, and tinkerer. And continuous learning is my jam, you say. And of course, you're host of the Steam-powered podcast. So actually, what do you mean by that? Continuous learning is my jam?
Well, everything that we do, we're just always learning, and there's always something new to find out and to discover and to learn and work and play. So it's just, I have a lot of interests. I program as my day job is as a programmer, and there's a lot of learning going on there as well, because there's always new technology, new platforms, new everything, and it's just constantly developing. But even outside of work, you're always learning, you're always doing stuff, you're always finding out new things. So yeah, it's just continuous learning, and it's so much fun.
And do you find, let's go into that, because let's give a little bit of context. So you say you're a programmer, and I know you've been working remotely for 10 years. Does that mean working from home?
Yes. So I stopped working in a corporate environment. My last day at the job was actually the opening of the Beijing Olympics. So that was my last day, went home and didn't leave home again, except for a couple of contract jobs. But, overall, I started working from home from that point.
And where are you based in the world?
I'm based in Perth, Australia.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I love that. I mean, I always say this on the show, that I love the fact that we can talk with people across the globe. And apart from Tim Burgess, who is with whom I'm now co-hosting Management Cafe, I don't get to speak to many people in Australia. Joe Palmer was another one. How has remote work, the view of remote work, evolved in Australia, do you think, over those 10 years that you've been working remotely?
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of concept, because Australia's always had this reputation for being slightly behind in a lot of things. We're always about a year behind in culture, like pop culture fads, and all these other little developments tend to be a little bit behind. But at the time that I started remote work in 2008, it was pretty uncommon. I mean, there were people who freelanced locally, but not really much in the way of people who did work with anyone internationally. And that was pretty hard to find. Even interstate remote work and telecommute was really hard to locate. So when I started working from home, I did, do all the usual stuff, went on the job boards, which were mainly US jobs, a few in the Europe area. But when I tried to look for any telecommute roles within Australia itself, just because of time zone convenience, a lot of people would say, oh, no, we don't do that. And it was almost, why would you even suggest such a thing? That's so strange and so foreign. And that was the attitude for quite a while. Recruiters would, they do their recruiting run, they contact you and say, oh, we've got this really great job available for you. And I said, well, I'm in Perth. I said, well, I'm in Sydney. Can you relocate? No, but I can telecommute. Oh, we don't do that. And it's just, it's almost like, this is so taboo. How scandalous of you to suggest such a thing. And, that kind of trend followed for quite a long time. And even before COVID hit, about a year before COVID, I got a bunch of messages from interstate, from people saying, oh, we've got a great job that sounds, just perfect for you. Would you come work for us? I said, well, I'm in WA. I'm not planning to relocate at this time. So, oh, we can't do that. It's not something that we do right now. And this is one of the large tech companies in Australia as well. And then, COVID hits, recruiter comes back in touch again. Oh, we're doing telecommute now. And it's just, oh gosh, you've missed that boat. But, that's the kind of attitude that we have even up until COVID. So even multinational tech companies based in Australia also had this thing against telecommute and remote work. And it was such an interesting thing to work with people in America and in Europe who were already doing remote work. And they were saying, yeah, it's just a thing that I do. I telecommute. I'm staying in Spain. I'm working in London. And, it's all that kind of stuff that other people do, but not in Australia. So, yeah, it was just, obviously it's all changed now because the climate's changed for, all this kind of stuff, and people are kind of getting on board with it. But, it was such a relatively new thing for people in this country to start considering that this was a valid option for employment and to get more access to better candidates. So they were still happily restricting themselves to the domestic, local, immediately within city or within town pool.
And a question then, do you think, and of
Mm.
course none of us have a crystal ball, do you think that the pandemic means that the country will be more open to telework and this kind of remote work? Or do you think that actually once, hopefully, we've gone over the hump, that attitudes might go back to how it was? What are you seeing?
That's a tough one because it does depend on the industry. So obviously, a few of them are a little bit more effective when they're in person in contact because of the way they handle relationships. But, some of the people I know working in the companies they work at, they're doing like partial return to the office. So, sometime in the office, sometime out, they get to choose, or they have a minimum number of hours they need to be physically on site. And I think that's a good thing. So if they start to continue allowing partial or this hybrid kind of scheduling for telecommute and on site, I think that is a good way forward. So even with local companies, that's the thing that they're doing. But I spoke to someone for Steam Power just recently, and she's a software engineer with chronic illness. And for her, like, she can't predict her chronic illness. It's just not what you can do. So she used to have a lot of trouble with on-site jobs before COVID because she would be ill and she'd have to choose between losing a whole day or staying and suffering through her chronic illness. And once COVID hit and she now had this option to take roles remotely, she found she had so much more flexibility because if she was ill, she could be ill and recover in the way that suited her best and then come back to work hours later on. And she would be more effective because she would get more work done while she was feeling fine rather than trying to suffer through and taking twice as long while she's ill. So, it's stuff like that that I think people need to consider because not everyone functions in exactly the same way. Not everyone is able, not everyone, has the same sort of system for effective and productive work. And, that's just for domestic. It also applies for anyone who's working remotely in somewhere that you can't, take public transport or drive to. So it's something that I think should continue. Whether it's going to continue, I don't know, because there's still a lot of conservative ideas along remote work and people not being visible and working at the same time. I mean, you look at Elon, you look at Mark Zuckerberg and all those, leaders in tech, and they have that same attitude, even though time and time again, people are showing we're just as effective at home as we are in the office.
And I always thought that tech companies would embrace remote work more because everyone's behind a computer for a lot of, well, I'm making assumptions. There's lots of people in tech companies that are not, all the time doing programming. But I've always found that baffling. But hey,
Yeah.
yeah, I suppose a style of management and also life experience. What you were saying about opening up through remote work, the jobs to a demographic that actually before would have struggled to, as you say, come into the office. I hope that organizations will start to see that as well, because it's always been one of the reasons for advocating for remote work is to give people who can't, who just have difficulty for whatever reason going to a place every day, that this opens up those opportunities for them. So can you remind us do you remember the name of your guest for that?
Okay, so the episode where we do speak about accessibility with remote work is with Jocelyn James. So she's a software engineer who resides in New York, works remotely, and is just thriving because she is now able to work the way she is most effective.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Thank you for that. So let's go to your, I'm going to say day to day, but to your own work. So do you work freelance, or what kind of contracts, or are you under contract with companies? How does that?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm with doing freelance work, but there were times where, occasionally I would actually look for contract work, or contract work would find me. And, that varies over the years. And I've been less inclined to take on the contract work than I have been before, just because it's less flexible. And often the contracts don't usually keep to the schedule that they had estimated when they bring me on. So often in those cases, I'm actually brought on midway or towards the end. And there's always going to be scope creep and, scheduling issues. So I'm less likely to take those on now than I used to. And yeah, so most of my work right now is freelance, working with clients either by myself or who I recommended to me. Because I've been doing this for a while, it's not too bad because I get return work, and a lot of people will refer me for other things or come back for new projects.
And just before I ask you a question around that flexibility that you have less of when contracting, what kind of work do you do? You said you're a programmer, but is this do you design websites?
Yeah, so I build websites. They might be, your basic WordPress or online presences, very simple, to web applications and, things that integrate with other services. Basically, integration, anything from integration to new builds and business websites. So a full range, whatever people need done, I will do my best and build it for them.
And if you're not sure, you learn.
Yeah, if I'm not sure, I learn. And in some cases, actually, because this has come up before, it's sometimes the best thing to do is, if I don't really feel confident that I will be able to build something that is the right solution for the client, I will turn it down and I will recommend someone else who might be better suited. Just because, not everything is going to be within my wheelhouse, and I am totally okay in admitting that.
Yeah, very important. So, okay, so you've already, I have to say, Michelle, I haven't looked at my notes yet because I'm building on this. Can I pick up on something you said, which was, you said you prefer freelance work because the contract work, you find it not as flexible. And I find that really interesting because, of course, this remote work or working from home has this big label of flexibility upon it.
Yes.
And it doesn't always mean that it comes with that. So what did you mean by that?
Okay, so flexibility for me is, because I do have a portfolio of clients, I need the flexibility to be able to manage, more than one client at a time. And sometimes the contract work won't give me that flexibility to be able to do that without completely burning myself out with extended work hours. For a few of the contracts, they have been local and on-site only. So that's also, problematic because I don't like to commute. Commuting is annoying. And you lose about an hour, hour and a half, each day traveling back and forth. For me, it's not too bad because I live pretty close to the city, but it's still time taken away that I could be productive and doing other things. And, a lot of the time it's in an environment where they will hover, or, I can't be directly doing the work that I'm doing because I'm, I'm just in an environment where there's always people walking around in open plan offices, or, people asking questions and things that don't need immediate attention. People will come up to you and ask questions that aren't necessary when they want you to be doing something that's more urgent. So it's, it depends on the environment, obviously, because some people are a little bit more conscientious of others in an office environment and some are not. And you just learn how to adapt to that. But I like the flexibility of being able to, stop when I want to have a break and, go out for a walk if I want some sunshine. And it's little things like that that I find more flexible.
Mhm.
I admit, when I first started freelancing, everyone was saying, "Oh, it must be so great. You could go on holiday and work at the beach and all that and become a digital nomad." And that's lovely and romantic as an idea, but it doesn't often happen in practice. I know a couple of people who are very dedicated to doing that. Good for them. I can't do that, in part because I have a child, but also because, and also because I have a child. But it's just not the kind of environment where I would work very well, because if I'm sitting at the beach, I'd want to be at the beach kind of stuff. So yeah, the flexibility is just being able to do my errands when I want to do them, do my work when I feel most productive, change my tasks when I, feel like doing something or when inspiration springs. So flexibility to me is being able to adjust at my whim for the way that I want to work and what I want to work on.
And then you've worked with with global clients. Has it been as part of a team? How do you work with global teams? What might that look like? And if you want to give us an example,
Yeah.
that's great, or you can keep it generic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done work for, a couple of companies like News Corp and Fox where we were working in teams. So that was part of a contracting company, and they were contracted to these organizations, and we worked as a team of developers building a bunch of stuff for them. So often, we would be distributed around the US, around the world, and we would communicate via Slack, via email. We schedule video calls, stuff that sounds familiar now. But yeah, it worked pretty well because we didn't treat chat, we treated chat async, which is what I think a lot of people forget to do. So, we drop a message. If you're there, you're there. If you're not, it's okay. I'll send you an email and you can look at it later at your convenience. It was very respectful of people's time and availability. And, coordinating across time zones, obviously a bit of challenge, especially for me. Like there were a few 11 p.m. and midnight meetings for me to have with New York, and that was fun occasionally. And they didn't happen very often because they understood we've got a globally distributed team. We can't impose these kind of hours on our people all the time. But, it's the nature of global work. You get used to doing these meetings occasionally, and that's cool. So yeah, that's just how we worked. We had tools, we used them effectively, and we were respectful of the people we worked with, and that's pretty much how it went.
Yeah, I understand correctly. You were doing this through a sort of agency that put a team together, and then almost as a is that right? No.
Yeah, sort of. In both these cases, it wasn't just we were kind of semi-permanent teams, and we would rotate between projects, and it wasn't just one and done. We were actually employed. We were actually part of this team. We got to know the other people in the team reasonably well as we could remotely, as well as a couple of on-site meet and greets where we would actually get together geographically and do the work for a little while, get all the kickoff sorted out, and then go back to our respective places and continue doing what we're doing. So yeah, these sorts of companies were designed to be mobile and flexible in that way. And it's not as though it's just single individual placements like a recruiting kind of consultancy.
I think definitely Hugo Messe, who was one of the very early guests on this show, who actually used to live in the Netherlands and he moved to Bali. I think he would run a company that worked in this way. I think it's really nice to have it's almost like I always see it as a team of freelancers that moves. So not a team, yeah. It's like instead of an internal software team department that has internal clients, it sounds like more you're working with external clients in parallel.
Pretty much all external, and we just get to know the clients. We, do all the sorts of things that you kind of do in-house, just not in-house.
Yeah, but it's nice because, like you say, you're still working with the same people, so that I imagine. So, actually? Let me ask you. What were the things that you enjoyed most about working in that way?
Again, it was the flexibility, but also getting to meet people from around the world and getting to learn from them, and not just professionally, but personally as well. So, I've had colleagues from South America, and I've had colleagues from America, Australia, UK, Poland. Like, it's all over the place. And it's nice to have such a lovely multicultural space to work in. And, there's some fun communication issues, but overall, like, we just learn from each other, we get to know each other, and we're a group of people who are happy to explore and happy to learn and travel and, learn from each other and, be culturally diverse. Because, when you're working domestically, you're only as diverse as the company that you're working in. And sometimes that's not very diverse. So, yeah, it's nice having that environment where you can learn from a bunch of other people from everywhere else in the world.
Now, we are recording on, it is the 16th of August, 2022.
Yep.
Now, this probably won't come out till around October, but Michelle, yesterday, I read a piece, which I think it was the CEO of JP Morgan, I think it was, saying that remote work was terrible for diversity. What he meant was that working from home when you don't leave your house or your neighborhood could affect how much diversity you have in your world. But of course, that is a very, very, very narrow view of what happens when you work remotely. And I know that he was talking about the context of what he's experienced, and and maybe in some cases he's right. But this is the thing that people don't understand, and it's that one, it can lead to a more diverse environment, even if that environment is accessed through a computer. And the other thing is that people look for different things as well. So it's really interesting that you made that point.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an interesting perspective.
Yes. I mean, there is no right or wrong. It's his perspective, but I just thought it was such an interesting, it's just interesting that you've
Contrast.
said. Yeah, exactly. Such a contrast. Such a contrast. Are you still working like that? No, you're now freelance, or?
Yeah, freelance for myself. So I haven't done those kind of organizational kind of remote teams for a little while. And that was kind of by design because I have a 5-year-old. So, up until relatively recently, my hours were much more restricted and much more variable. So it wasn't conducive to have a job where they have a little bit more demand on my time. And, for those kinds of teams, you do need to have a minimum number of hours per week commitment in order to be functional. So, yeah, it's pretty much just freelance for myself, clients that I've built up myself, and that's pretty much how it is at the moment.
And how do you feel in that gap? Because I was hearing you that you really enjoyed the sense of belonging to the team, and you said you mentioned learning from each other quite a few times.
Yes.
So I imagine that you're doing something to fill in that gap. Can you elaborate?
The podcast is filling that gap for me right now, because it's pretty isolating when you do work freelance, because even though you do or might have a team whom you communicate with, it's still not quite the same. Admittedly, you do miss on the body language and some of the visual, the physical cues that you might get from communication, and that's such an important part of communication. And, unless you've got people to bounce off of, it is really quite challenging to be able to get that kind of interpersonal connection in the workplace when you're pretty much solo. So that got a little bit tiring for me for a bit. And that's part of why, like one of the many reasons why I started Steam Powered. So I could, learn from other people, absolutely doing things that aren't what I do day to day. But, getting to speak to people around the world and, getting a little bit more understanding of what people's upbringing and work life is like. And, that's how I fill that gap for me. So I understand not everyone can kind of do that. But, other things exist online because, internet is amazing. And we've got all these online communities for developer groups. And, there's, Meetup, and there's, all these specific groups for people in different fields. So you might be in DevOps, you might be, just dev in general, or you might be in security. And there's communities and groups all around where you can do that kind of thing and connect with those people without having to work directly with them. and you still get the same value because you get to see how people work in other companies and in other environments and, with other backgrounds. And hopefully the group you have is also, international, and you can communicate with people overseas as well. So there's heaps of ways of being able to get this kind of enrichment in a freelance work from home kind of space.
Yes. Yeah. It really is, for me, what I'm thinking is just turning what could be a real threat to your well-being into an opportunity. And thinking, well, yes, I am at home, but I've got access to the internet and I've got the flexibility. So let me look for these places. One question is going back to your work with global teams as well. What were some of the things that you found most challenging when you were working with a global group?
The time zone is definitely one of the most obvious obstacles, I guess. It means that you do have to be very flexible with your time, and you don't have to bend over backwards and completely tax yourself to do it, but you do have to have a bit of flexibility. So you have to be prepared to take some late or early meetings, or occasionally there would be overseas trips that you organize, which are both good and bad. So a lot of people think travel for work is 100% amazing until you do it. Because when you're traveling for work, you're not traveling for pleasure. Like literally, that's not what you're doing. You're going there, you go from the airport to the hotel, office. You might have a weekend or you might have an evening to yourself to do some stuff, but you're there for a purpose. And it's nice to be able to get a bit of a sea change. That's awesome. You get to check out new space. That's cool. But it's not a holiday. And a lot of people assume that because you're traveling for work, it's a holiday. But, when you frame yourself when you're going on these trips as, I'm getting to meet my coworkers, I'm getting to get to know these people, I'm getting to meet the client and get to understand them a bit better, because at the moment we're just a face on a screen. That kind of stuff is the stuff that you need to think about when you are working remotely. So going back to, the other obstacles, it's finding or making sure that if you're setting up an environment where you are pulling together people for remote teams, you provide them the appropriate tools to communicate, and you allow them to use the tools the best way that they can to make themselves effective. So I've spoken to a few people who they've got communicator at the office, but everyone's just brawling in one chat room and just water cooler talking, and you're just getting notifications over and over and over and over. And that's really quite disruptive. And it's because people treat it like live, active communication, but broadcast mediums are not to be used that way. Like that's not the kind of space for it. So setting up kind of not boundaries, but yes, boundaries. So setting up framework for the way that people can use these tools, and just getting people to be aware that they have to be courteous or conscientious about how they do it, because other people are going to be there. You don't just CC everyone on an email. You don't just broadcast chat, that you're off to get a smoke kind of thing. Like it's not the kind of space for it, and you can't immediately translate one-to-one what you do in a physical environment onto a digital one. And, for a lot of people who haven't been around this space before, it is really hard for them to get a hold of that in terms of how you translate it, because they want a one-to-one mapping, and you can't always get a one-to-one mapping.
Yeah. What do you mean by that, by the one-to-one mapping in this context, Michelle?
So in this context, it's like you can't just like going up to someone in an office to ask them a question versus, how you approach them online, and having a medium that's appropriate to do that. So, you can't just have, when you want to go to chat to someone, you just call up a video call and just call them impromptu. That's not how it works. Like you can't just be spontaneous with a lot of this communication, because you don't know what the other person's doing at the other end on the internet. So it's, just trying to understand how to translate these mediums into this new format of work, and being aware that you can't just, do a complete substitute and hope that it works for the best.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing a lot of. I think also on the point of spontaneity, you can. It's interesting because you could have a team where it's okay to just call through, but
absolutely.
you have to have agreed that. And you have to have it
Yes.
read away. Because
Yeah.
that's the other thing. It was pre-pandemic that I was running a workshop and I was talking about this, and somebody asked, well, since when has it been a problem to pick up the phone and call someone? And my reply was that, yes, you are supposed to be available if you're working under an hour, your day
Yeah.
starts here and ends here. But at the same time, we've changed how we work. So before if we were at our desk, we would pick up the phone or let it go to voicemail, actually.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
But now we construct our work differently. So we like, and part of that working away from each other is part of that, those borders and barriers. So yeah, I find that very interesting.
Yeah. The idea of
yeah.
boundaries is such an interesting concept in this new world of working from home. And it's such an unusual kind of problem to have, to put it
Yes.
very understatedly. Because, the whole thing with phoning people is like, people can screen your calls. This is a thing that happens, and it totally happens whether you're aware of it or not. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yes. I'm reading A World Without Email, Carl Newport, which is, have you read it?
No, I haven't.
So it's a few years old now. I think it's pre-pandemic. And he talks exactly about this issue of having created the hive mind, where there's not an issue to have ongoing communication. And he basically talks mainly about the problem with email, but he also says, well, this happens now with Slack, etc. And it is that thing of, and I was thinking that a lot of the teams who have adopted these tools during the pandemic, during lockdown, have used them in that way because that's what they needed at that point. They wanted, because they weren't getting connection any other way. So we're using these. And what's happened is that now that we are going into designing a more sustainable way of remote work, that habit has stayed. So it's like you say, we've got to see, hang on, this is not the same. I mean, you can have processes and ways of communicating where you feel connected, where you feel a sense of belonging, like you can learn from each other. But it's not like always being available, like you're in a physical space, or always being present. So I think that's a very interesting shift.
And, whenever anyone brings up the death of email, I'm always, it makes me feel like I'm meant to be an old person. But email is so useful because it's asynchronous. People can reply to it at their leisure or at their convenience. You can be a bit more wordy in an email and they can take their time to read and respond. And because I work with so many of my clients remotely, and not all of them are completely tech savvy, and heaven forbid they want me to be live on chat at any point in time, I would say no. But it's just one of those things where email is useful because it's a little bit more trackable, although you should be using other tools for that. But it's a lot more easy to keep track of what's going on. One of the biggest trends that I am horrified by and I just cannot stand are people who conduct support over Slack and Discord. Because how on earth do you keep track of anything that's just gone on? How do you find someone with an issue that was similar to yours and what the resolution was when you have to troll through chat messages? Like, I think it's the worst idea of implementing this kind of communication medium. But, people keep doing it.
Do you mean having a Slack instead of having a dedicated support person?
It's more the way that the chat, like having a chat to initiate queries, I think is fine because, they might signpost you to documentation that's more appropriate. But if you use it like a ticketing system where everything is communicated and resolved within that chat, when everyone is talking in one group channel and you've got hundreds of people in there, it's really unmanageable. Like it like direct messages, I understand because it's one-to-one and it just means that the answer can't always be shared. And I think they like it in the group because it means that the knowledge can be shared, but it's impossible to search. It's a really ineffective medium for this kind of thing. Nothing is accountable. Inquiries get lost and people ask the same questions because they can't be bothered reading through thousands of messages to scroll back. Yeah. And it's just, this is one of those places where you can't translate talking to someone over the phone in support one-to-one with a Discord channel. that just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, but that's another example of maybe using a tool in a way that actually it wasn't designed for that,
Yeah.
and you don't really have the ability to adapt it, so it can work like that. So it's a really good
I know.
point. It's a good reminder. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, let me just. Oh, I've lost my train of thought because I was going everywhere.
Yeah, sorry.
No, no, on the contrary. No, it's great. It's great. Actually, I wanted to ask you about your relationship with your clients,
Mhm.
and overall. No, don't need to go into specifics, but
Yep.
uh, obviously, you've talked us through how it was difficult to find clients who would work with you remotely at the beginning.
Mhm.
Have you seen how the now that your freelance is different? Basically, how do you see that clients are viewing working remotely now?
Um, it's interesting because it's a self-selecting group.
Mm,
The clients I found are looking for people who either work for themselves and they don't have to pay, additional fees through contracting companies, because there are some companies where they'll mark up your hourly rate by about 150, 200, 250%, which is really quite obscene, to be quite honest. I think that's absurd. Um, so, the clients are getting shafted through the nose for work that they could be getting directly at just as good quality without having to pay for that kind of premium by going through another firm.
mm,
There are other benefits, obviously, to having firms like that. But if you're having individual smaller projects, going through those firms is really not practical. Um, so, yeah, my clients are the kind of ones who are looking for independent contractors with a bit of flexibility, who are happy to, not have to do day to day, everyday contact kind of thing. Like, you touch base, you send an email about updates and things like that. But also flexible enough to cater for the fact that they have a day job too. They have other things that they're working on, or this might be their, side gig. And so the people that I work with are, just naturally gravitating in that direction. So their attitudes are quite on par with where I am for this kind of work. Yeah, it's definitely just because it's self-selecting.
And you're making me think, of course, that in this context, we've got the freelancer who wants that independence, that autonomy, but also the client who wants to work with someone with that independence and autonomy.
Exactly.
Good stuff. I think that for now, I think I've now got an idea, a better idea, as I was saying to you, Michelle, before we started recording, that I knew what you did as a podcaster because we had that conversation on Adventures in Podcasting, episode 31, listeners, where I talked to Michelle about the steam-powered podcast. And so now I have a much better idea. And it's actually quite nice to have had someone on the show who is who's been working as a remote worker in a different kind of context to what I
Mhm.
usually come across, and also that you've got this overview of the last 10 years, which I always think is a fascinating conversation. Just to wrap up this, because our listeners might be interested in the steam powered podcast, do you want to just tell us what the show is about? What do you talk about in the show?
Yeah, so STEAM powered is, STEAM is the acronym for science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics, and medicine. So I talk to women who are in these fields about their journeys to how they got into STEM and what they're working on, what they're passionate about, and kind of what they've learned along the way in terms of professionally and in, just general life advice. And it's been fascinating because, all of us have these, well, most of us have these very nonlinear paths, and we've got very diverse experiences. And it's just wonderful learning from all these people about what's going on in the world and what's going on with them. And, I'm obviously so biased, but I recommend you listen to it because, it's such an interesting glimpse into the lives of these people who are just like everyone else. We come from all walks of life. We, have all these interests and we have all these things that we want to do. And you get to hear from some of them about all the stuff that means something to them. And I love it. It's great.
Yeah, no, it is a wonderful show, and as well the long form interviews, which I love, and also I also come from the world of science. I didn't really go into it at all, but I
Yeah.
appreciate, and it's a world that I don't hear enough about, and also just the stories of how people end up going into depth into sometimes stuff that can look very small physically,
Yes.
but there's so much thought behind all of it. So steam powered listeners. Michelle, before I ask you if there are any podcasts or books that you would like to recommend to our listeners, either in your field as a programmer, DevOps, whatever, that's another world I don't really know much about, or the world of work. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about your experience as a remote worker all this time?
Remote work has given me so many opportunities that I wouldn't have had as, just working locally for companies, because I've gotten to travel. I've gotten to meet a bunch of people, work for companies that I don't think I would have otherwise unless I physically relocated. It's such a great opportunity because, if you have portable skills, make use of them. Take advantage of the fact that, literally the world is out there and we have the internet. Like, the fact that we have the internet just changes everything. So, don't narrow your scope for what your potential is to your geographic region. Like, there's so much more.
Wonderful. So with those inspirational words, any other sources of inspiration we can draw from? Maybe one or two podcasts and books, or one on each?
Yeah, so I've been listening to the Angela Duckworth book on grit. So Angela Duckworth did this TED talk called Grit. You should look it up. It's amazing. And it's talking about resilience and just the way that people, power through and find the way to pick themselves back up again, because, failure is not a terminal state. And it's something that I think a lot of people need to learn. Like, failures are just ways to figure out how not to do things. And, just being able to persevere is just such a fascinating way of shaping your mindset. So that's a really good book. I think everyone should take a look at. See, what I'm also enjoying is How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. And she has interviews long form with a bunch of people about all their life failures. And that's just fascinating, and also kind of gives you perspective. In terms of stuff that's just cool and fun, I like 99% Invisible, because it's just talking about all the things we take for granted in the world around us. So yeah, those are three things that I think people can take a look at.
Great. The Grit has been on my list for ages. Maybe I'll have a listen a listen, because I have to say that even TED Talks, I just switch off, just listen to them. I'll have a listen to the TED Talk. Well, Michelle Ong, thank you very much. What's the best way of people to connect with you if they want to stay connected or find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can definitely stay in touch through Steam Powered. So steampoweredshow.com is the website, and all the socials on there as well. It's all Steam Powered Show in pretty much that spelling, except for on Twitter, where there is no O at the end because they have a 15-character limit. But yeah, just go to the website. You'll find out lots of ways to get in touch there.
Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much, and have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Pilar.
A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.